I almost took my life. I almost lost my marriage. I was falling apart to the point of like about to be alone.
Here's what nobody tells you about being the strong one. You spend 20 years being the guy who holds it together. Then the mission's over, the uniform comes off, and your body sends you the bill. The sleep's gone, the fuse is short. You feel a decade older than your license says. You go get checked, and they tell you everything's normal. But you're not normal. You're carrying a debt nobody's counting. That's not aging. That's a receipt coming due. I'm Zac Armstrong, retired naval commander. Now I coach high-performing men over 40 who've hit a ceiling they just can't explain. This is no hype, just standards. My guest lived at the edge of that ceiling for 23 years. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, retired Army Green Beret, tours in Colombia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. A New York Times bestselling author, playwright, founder of Task Force Pineapple, and the man behind Rooftop Leadership. In 2021, he helped pull Afghans out after the withdrawal. Trust built in hours, with lives on the line. Now he teaches what all that costs a man and what it gives back. We both wore the uniform. Two guys who know the price, talking straight about what the standard system never measures. If you felt that gap between where you've been told and what you feel, this one's for you. Hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Scott, again, thanks for joining us. So 23 years in the Special Forces, tours in Colombia, Iraq, Afghanistan. When you look back, what was your body actually doing all those years that you never stopped to notice?
Well, just to be, it was about 18 in SF and about 23 in the Army, but it all feels like 23. Let's see. You know, so much of what I was just talking to another Green Beret buddy of mine. I mean, not that long ago today, in fact, and I was talking about the stuff that you push down to stay in the fight. You know, the stuff that you push down to stay in the game, to stay relevant, really. And I'm 57 now, and it is amazing the stuff that I'm noticing now about my body, performance-wise, that I look back on it now that it was there. I mean, things with my knees, with my back, with my hips. The tinnitus, you know, all of those things, but I just normalized them because the thought of not being able to stay relevant and stay deployed was more terrifying to me than anything that was going on with my body. And I think at the time too, you know, the way the global war on terror went was like you just felt like you were going to kind of live forever, and you would deal with all that crap down the road. And so, but for me, it was knees and back really that I know that I ignored and continued to degrade just so that I could stay in the fight.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk about the physical attributes of it, but what about the mental attributes on it as well?
I think for that one, even more so, right? Because the way I thought about, I mean, I got out in 2013, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I can tell you in my SF community or my group, in 2013, no one was talking about mental health.
No,
You know,
no.
so you just didn't. And at the time, honestly, I don't even know that I mean, there were things going on in how I acted in my marriage. There were things going on in how I acted towards my kids. And frankly, I was starting to experience levels of depression and things like that. But I didn't have any baseline to compare it to.
No, and it's hard when you don't have that, right? To sit there and try to walk yourself through it. And I imagine that's what you did.
Yeah, and honestly, it wasn't until I was ready to retire in 2013 or maybe 2012 when I'd made the decision to retire. And I went to DC to meet one of my mentors, Doc Dave Phillips, who was on the original Jawbreaker team that went in as the pilot team on post 9/11. He was a CIA operator, but before that he was an iconic Fifth Group guy who had worked with the Montagnards in Vietnam. And anyway, just highly regarded, respected individual. And I couldn't wait to sit down with him and talk to him about my retirement and all the plans I had. And he kind of stopped me mid-sentence and he said, "Now, Scott, you make sure that you watch out for those snakes in the head. And when they start squirming, and they will, you reach out to me or somebody else." And I was kind of ticked off by it. I thought, what are you even talking about, man? Like I'm trying to
Felt
lay
judged.
trying to lay my plan out for you, and you just blew it, but man, did he call that one? I mean, within a few days, honestly, of retirement, I started to experience what felt like just like snakes in the head, just really squirrely thinking that I had not been cognizant of before. And that's when I really knew, Zach, that something was like off, like something was different.
So
That
right,
yeah.
let's walk through that. So when you separated, how long did it take you? You said days before it started happening. Like, what did you do to help with that?
I ignored it and I pushed it down.
Yeah.
And that was the only at the time that was the only tool I had. I'd been sober for a lot of years, and so I had certain tools to cope with my addiction, but this was different. This was the only thing I knew to do was push it down and ignore it and pretend like everything's okay. And especially now that I was a civilian, I mean, I was working a contract job. I was writing a book. I was home. My three kids were still in school. This was what we had been waiting for God's sake. Like this was the thing that we had deferred for almost 2 decades. And now I'm gonna, like go crazy. That's what it felt like, and I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna be present. I'm gonna show up for my family. And so I just buried that, but there was this persistent agitation and just feeling of like absence of purpose, unsettled, untethered, and it just got progressively worse. And I really didn't know how to deal with it, and there was no one that I was talking to about it,
Yeah,
including
it's
my wife.
hard. It's hard to make that initial outreach. Always is. What what spurred you to maybe make that first initial outreach that you did?
It just got so bad that I almost took my life, and I knew that and I almost lost my marriage. I had become so hard to live with my wife and my boys that I could tell that I was falling apart to the point of like about to be alone. And that's when I knew I had to figure something else out. And honestly, what for me it was working with a couple of mentors on storytelling. Everybody
Mhm.
finds their own way if they find it, and my modality, um, and it was purely accidental because I felt like taking acting classes and storytelling classes might help me be a presenter and be more relevant in the world because I felt like my skills in human connection were needed in this divided country that we lived in. But I had so much anxiety and imposter syndrome post military life that I couldn't get in front of a group of veterans and talk about veteran issues. Like, so how was I going to get on a stage with corporate leaders and talk about building trust? But I wanted to, and so I got into storytelling thinking that might help me, but it ended up being the modality that helped me make sense of things that didn't make sense and eventually start to heal.
Yeah, and talking about that with the building trust, you had to build trust with people in hours when your life was on the line. How do you actually connect with someone so fast?
Special forces helped me with that a lot.
Yeah, the EQ, I imagine, right?
Yeah, and because by definition you were going into places that were undergoverned, at risk, low trust. By definition, like that was where you targeted to go.
Yeah,
And so, you went in there knowing that you were going to have to build social capital. In other words, you were going to have to build tangible and intangible linkages between you and other humans. The way I explain it to civilians today is this idea of going in with 12 and coming out with 12,000. That's the combat multiplier that special forces is supposed to provide, whether it's through unconventional warfare or some other means, is that we build social capital that becomes a combat multiplier for bottom up solutions, right? So you can mobilize indigenous people to stand up and do things collectively they otherwise wouldn't do. Well, that is 100% built around relationships and trust and rapport. And so I did learn a lot from iconic special forces NCOs and officers who taught me how to do that. But I will tell you this, Zach, there really wasn't a craft or a regimen for that. It was a lot of instinct and observed behavior, but there
right.
wasn't a real grammar or language for it. And that was what actually fascinated me when I got out of the military. I thought, man, there's such a trust deficit here at home. What if I could build a body of work around human connection, social capital, rapport that would help business leaders and moms and dads and travel ball coaches employ the kind of interpersonal craft that we used in special forces. And so that became my thing, and it still is. And so I guess what I'm telling you is I learned the instinct and approach to this in special forces, but it's really in the last 13 years of diving into it as a civilian and teaching it and iterating it and working with other social scientists and negotiators and storytellers that I've learned to actually put a grammar or a language to it.
Right. And I imagine that some of that too is just needing that downtime, because when you're in it and you're moving, and it's hard to kind of rationalize everything that you're going through. So
Yeah.
for anyone who doesn't know, can you kind of explain to us what Task Force Pineapple is?
Yeah, it's funny that it's we have all these task forces, right, in the world and country, and
Yeah.
Task Force Pineapple was everything but that. Task Force Pineapple was kind of it was an informal group of veterans and other volunteers who, like many other groups, self-organized around the chaotic withdrawal of 2021 when Afghanistan collapsed and we left and frankly, as a nation, wholesale abandoned tens, if not hundreds of thousands of our allies in Afghanistan to fend for themselves as the Taliban overran the country. And for me and a handful of other veterans in our group, I was not good with that. I had a friend, Nizam, and others who were on the run, being hunted, targeted, and so we came together using cell phones and relationships on this side of the pond. We didn't go over there, but we were pretty good at remote ops. You know, like a lot of veterans from the War on Terror were. We were good at distributed operations using cell phones and virtual communications. And so and our knowledge of the terrain and relationships inside country. And we built this network that helped quite a few Afghan allies and their families get into Kabul International Airport and then ultimately into the West to freedom. And we became known as Task Force Pineapple. And that pineapple term came from a code word that the first passenger, Nizam, had to use as a password to get through. They told him to say pineapple. So we
That's
started
very cool.
calling ourselves Task Force Pineapple.
Right. That's awesome. What does that mean to you? Like, to do something, you know, of that abundance of, a human effort to help others. What does that mean to you when you look back on that?
It's mixed. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that we as veterans were not good with the decision that was institutionally made and we went against it.
Yeah.
and we stood up for what we thought was right and frankly what we were trained for. How many years, Zach, were we trained by, with, and through? You don't leave a man on the battlefield,
Ever.
like
Right.
forever. And so all of a sudden now it's okay to do that, and so I feel good about that. I feel less good about the moral injury that resulted from this, the violation of one's moral code by people that we previously trusted. I feel really bad about the ones we didn't get out. There were a lot more that we did not get out than we did, and many of them have been killed and tortured and made to disappear. I don't know what it'll be like if we ever have to go back into Afghanistan and our children have to go in and work with indigenous communities again. I don't know what social capital will look like in other places. Like if, for example, if we worked with surrogates in Iran, I have to think it would be much harder. So there's a mixed bag. In fact, I'm doing a one-man play right now called 11 Days, the story of Operation Pineapple Express, where I'm traveling the country in the 25th anniversary of 9/11 and the 5th anniversary of the botched withdrawal, telling the story from the stage about what it means to honor a promise and what happens if you don't. And I tell you what, man, I have interacted with so many veterans and military
Right.
families, and they are really feeling the pain and the moral injury from that abandonment 5 years later.
Yeah. And and this as well too, that has a potential to turn on us too, because generationally they'll look at that as something that happened to them. What about rooftop leadership? Let's talk about it. What is it in plain terms?
Well, rooftop leadership really stems from it stems from the program that we did in Afghanistan in the early, well, let's say it was like 2010. We knew we were losing the war in Afghanistan, and that's because there were more Taliban in the rural areas than when we started in 2001. And we needed a new plan, a new strategy. We had been living on built up fire bases and working top down into these rural areas for a decade, and that hadn't worked. And honestly, it had allowed the Taliban, who we had driven from the country, to re-enter the country and start establishing connections and relationships at a village level. So the villages, this was a rural insurgency, and we had lost the villages by 2008 or 9 to the Taliban. And so we were trying to treat this as an urban drive to work kind of thing, and that just wasn't working. So in 2010, we got back to our roots as a special forces community, and we decided to do kind of a modern day Magnificent Seven. Everybody grew their beards out and donned indigenous garb and moved into communities that were occupied by the Taliban and villages that were willing to work with us. We made them three promises. It's like, hey, if you don't want us here, we'll leave. It's going to get worse before it gets better, and the Taliban are going to come for you, and they're going to come for us. And if they do, we're going to be up on those rooftops fighting to defend this community alongside you. Or even if you don't come up there, we're going to fight them anyway. And so that became what was known as Village Stability Operations. But the whole thing hinged, Zach, on our ability to build social capital out in these rural villages, and over time to get the locals to come up on the rooftops when we were attacked and defend their own communities one rooftop at a time. And I watched this occur over and over again. And pretty soon I started calling it rooftop leadership, this ability to move people up onto a proverbial rooftop when they're reluctant, when they're scared, when they're afraid. And what I learned was that really comes down to being able to use old school interpersonal skills and build trust when risk is low. And then when the actual event presents itself and everybody's terrified, as a leader, are you willing to go up on that rooftop even though nobody joins you? Like, those are the two components of it. You got to build trust, and you got to be willing to go up on that roof by yourself. And that's what has become kind of my methodology for leadership for the last 15 years. And I think it works just as well here at home.
Right. And so how do you interlace that with like the corporate world and at home?
Yeah, well, I mean, think about the world we live in today, right now. I talked to you about the Afghanistan thing, where you would go into a village and you've got an elder looking at you through a furrowed brow, and he's pretty pissed off, and you don't even know
Yeah.
why, because there's been 40 years of war, and he's got a cup of green tea to his left and an AK-47 to his right, and you're just like, man, I'm hoping he picks up that green tea.
Yeah.
And everything that you're doing is to try to get him to pick up that green tea, take a sip, have a conversation, incrementally build rapport, then trust, and then maybe over time loyalty, where you fight together. And to do that, you have to overcome this churn of disconnection and disengagement and distrust. Well, I don't think it's that different here at home today. If you look, I mean, the levels of distraction in the United States are measured in seconds, not minutes.
Oh yeah.
85% of the population, according to Gallup, is disengaged, and two-thirds of Americans don't trust their neighbors. I mean, hell, they're calling it the trust recession that we live in. So you think about corporate leaders, you think about our communities, you think about the 24/7 news cycle, moms and dads at the PTA. Like, we live in some very tribal times. And so trying to teach leaders at the corporate level, at the nonprofit level, at the community level, small business level, those old school interpersonal skills, also to understand the churn of what we're up against, is very different than what it was 5 years ago. And that this human operating system, our biology, our primal innate drivers of meaning and emotion and social capital and storytelling and struggle, are still the best gifts we have, but we've buried them, man. They've become invisible. So
Yeah.
I'm
And I
trying
mean,
to know how to access those.
that comes from the world that we live in, right? Like, that instant gratification that we seek now, because with social media or anything, like, uh, we're so sensitive to time now that it's hard to build trust, because we honestly just don't have the patience for it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think also we're Dr. Ivan Tyrrell in the Human Givens. He talks about this thing called the trance state, And he says that, humans we're driven by our emotions, even though we like to pretend that we're not.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
And he says that anger makes you stupid, fear makes you stupid. When you live in prolonged and persistent anger and fear, your frontal cortex shuts down, and the part that controls ration and logic shuts down,
Hmm.
and you go into neural override. You go into fight, flight, or freeze. Your autonomic nervous system takes over, and you go into a sympathetic state, right?
Yep,
And so now
100%.
you're in survival state, your
Yep,
survival mode,
fight or flight.
and that's it. And Tyrrell calls that a trance state. And if you look around the country today, most people are in a trance state or one
Yeah.
from it.
In the world that I operate in now, I talk to people all the time about that, and especially you keep yourself in that state, and the cortisol levels are high, the way you operate is high,
Yeah.
and you burn out. And what happens is what you talked about. You become so disengaged when you're in that state with everything, not just work, but your life, and the people around you.
Yeah.
For you, when you're talking to the corporate leaders and trying to tell them what is like, 2 or 3 things that you always point on, like, hey, this is how we try to build trust and rapport in the best ways and approaches.
I love that question. I love that question. I try to come at it. I tell them I'm your rapport coach. Like I'm your rapport
I
coach,
like
right?
that.
And the reality is you're looking across that elder right now who's trying to figure out if he's going to pick up the green tea or the AK. Now the stakes are different, but that's where he is or she is. That's where that buyer is. That's where that prospect is. That's where your teenager is. Are they going to completely shut you off, or are they going to listen for 5 more seconds, right? And so what I tell them is, the first thing is you got to make a human connection first. I don't care what your agenda is. If it's a PowerPoint presentation to an all hands, or if it's a sales presentation, you got to make a human connection first. If you don't make a human connection first, then the odds are they're not coming with you. So that's
No.
number one. You got to make a human connection first. Then you've got to get the other party ready to listen to what you have to say. And what I found is that most people today, including our children, are in such a sympathetic trance state, they're not ready to listen.
No.
They, they can't really hear because they're so agitated. So you've got to bring their emotional temperature down, right? How do you do that? That's my third point I would tell them is it's not the things you say, it's the questions you ask. The best way to get your prospect or your kid or your spouse ready to listen to you are to ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that start with what and how, and let them tell you a story in return. And if you do that, you'll bring their emotional temperature down, you'll get them ready to listen, and then there's a place where you can actually say, hey, is it okay now if I share with you how I think I can help you? Or is it okay if I tell you what I think we can do here? So make a human connection first, get them ready to listen,
Right.
get them ready to listen by asking questions or using questionology.
That's I love that, the way that that's framed. Do you ever talk to them about nonverbal communication?
Yeah, I do. And one of the things that I found with nonverbal communication is that rather than try, because if you're not careful in an engagement, you can get all caught up in your head and
Hmm.
you're trying to read tells or whatever. The place for nonverbal communication to me, Zach, is in your preparation before the engagement, right? If you think about it, most of us are running so hard from one meeting to the next. I was just talking to a bunch of commercial bankers and I asked them, how many Zoom calls do y'all do a day? They said 11. 11 Zoom calls. I'm like, when do you go to the bathroom? You know, but what I told them was, I said, what do you think it's like for the audience that you're speaking to at that 11th Zoom call? Right. And I said, how agitated and tired do you think you sound? You know, and I said, so one of the things that you can do is you can reset your own energy. Leadership and engagement is the management of energy. So when it comes to nonverbal, what I say is this: before you go into your sales call, before you get up in front of a room and give a presentation, or before you go home at night to your spouse and kids, do two things. One, close your eyes and do 3 belly breaths. Just
Hmm.
3 big belly
Yep.
breaths. And then with your eyes still closed, say, I have time 3 times. And just those 3 breaths, those 3 diaphragmatic breaths, and those 3 I have times will slow you down and get you present so that you're there non-verbally, and they will get you in the right state of mind so that you're ready to listen to the other party
Hmm.
and you're not all up in your head.
I like that. I teach something similar. I don't do the verbatim like you do, but the breathing technique. Um, It works a lot more wonders than people think. Small little things that we can do in our lives make a huge difference.
Small
Um,
sensations. Small
yeah,
sensations like noticing the temperature in the room, noticing your feet on the floor, notice your breath, notice the feel of your clothes on your skin. You can do all these things when you're in a conversation, and it's impossible to notice your breath at the same time that you're in your head thinking about what you're going to say next. So, if you just notice your breath in a conversation, you'll listen better.
right. And speaking of listening, in your world, silence was trained to you. Why is it so hard for men to open up, even when staying quiet is clearly costing them, probably at home, at work, and other endeavors?
I think it's because we're conditioned to do so, particularly like in the special operations world. There's this whole quiet professional thing, right? And somehow, which I agree with, by the way, like being a quiet professional and not spouting off and showing your butt and all that. I agree with that. But that doesn't mean being a silent professional. Being a silent professional means that you're not advocating for yourself. It means that you don't have emotional access to the feelings that you have in the moment, which means you're basically robotic and dead to the world. We know that through recent neuroscience that to effectively engage another human, two things have to happen. You have to gain and hold the attention of the other party, and you have to resonate emotionally. Well, if you're silent all the time, right, or if you're buttoned up or you're buried or you're armored up, you're not going to do those things, which
No,
means you look like you don't trust yourself, and the other party is not going to trust you either.
no,
So I think we've created a culture, Zach, where somehow emotional access, storytelling, and interpersonal skills at just a relatable level. Forget vulnerability. Just be relatable. You don't have to be vulnerable. Just be relatable. And that to me seems just almost taboo in the world that we live in, and it's killing us. It's killing, particularly men. I'm
no.
and young men.
This starts eating your insides, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to like take the approach you to reaching out to people. Um, the title "Generosity of Scars." What does it mean to call a scar generous?
Well, to back that up metaphorically, I'm a storyteller. And so I always wanted to write a book about storytelling. And the methodology that I teach in storytelling is the generosity of scars. And in this case, scars are simply a metaphor for struggle. And the idea being that storytelling is a 100,000-year-old sense making tool. It's the most effective way to communicate, even today in the modern world. And the way our brain works is it has a mandate to make sense of the world, and it uses story to do that. And if you can convey your ideas, products, thoughts in a story that starts with struggle and then it moves over to resolution, in other words, how you changed and what you learned from that struggle, the other party can't look away from you. They'll forget they even own a cell phone. And it could be in a TED talk, it could be in a sales pitch, it could be talking to your teenager. But the idea is you have to take the scars in your life that scuffed you up, the struggles, and you repurpose them into stories that serve other people, hence the generosity. Generosity means giving all of oneself when you share a story, giving all of yourself to the story you tell and the people that story serves. And most people are not willing to do that. Most people are
No.
buttoned up, they
Yeah.
communicate from the neck up. And so generosity in this case means giving all of oneself in the story that you tell in the service of your audience.
Yeah. And I frame it usually a little different with the scars. Um, no one can become a hero without having that journey of having scars or something happening to them to make them become the person there. Uh, and so the reason I ask that is because I'm a firm believer. You have to have things in your life that happen to become that storyteller to help other people because it makes you a more generous person, more humble, right? Definitely the things that occurred in my life have made me humble, and from that, helping your fellow man means so much more. At least
Right.
for me, it does.
Yeah.
And for you, being able to do that in the same way with the storytelling and helping others is impactful. Um,
Thanks.
what what is your favorite story?
Oh, my favorite story. It's none of mine. I love telling stories, but I love hearing them. You know,
Right.
I,
Okay, then what's your favorite story you've heard?
I would say the stories that my dad would tell about growing up in Appalachia
Okay.
and fire and his stories firefighting. I loved. He passed away last summer, and I thought he was the best storyteller I ever met. And there's a TEDx talk if people want to check it out. If you just type in Rex Mann Youngstown TEDx. You'll see it. But my dad, at 73 years old, 6 months after beating cancer, he got up on the stage and he told a story about the restoration of the American chestnut tree. But he opens with a story about him and his father and us kids sitting around a fire up in the mountains. And from the first words out of his mouth, he has you, man. You can't move. Like that old man gets you. He was such a masterful storyteller. And the story was very simple, but it was filled with imagery and love and sensory details. And you can't help but be transported into it and feel like you're right there with him, and you hear the fire pop and you smell the smoke. And next thing you know, the guy's got you in a trance. And that was, for me, growing up as a kid, being able to sit in his presence and hear him tell stories. Like it was the most magical thing in the world. Still is to this day. I still got recordings of his stories, and I'll just sit and listen to them.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Your other book says nobody's coming to save you. For the man waiting to be diagnosed or rescued, what is the line "good news and not bad"?
Well, because, that was just a mantra that I heard Green Beret NCOs tell me all the time. Because, like we talked about, by definition, you're going into these undergoverned, at-risk, remote areas where trust is low, and you got 12 dudes, if you're lucky. And, you're going to be there a long time, and it's going to get ugly. And the NCOs that raised me and taught me, they would always say, "Sir, nobody's coming."
Yeah.
It's just, but they would always say it with a big grin on their face, because it was really empowering and it was really liberating, because you knew that the guys that were at your left and right were the best in the world. You knew that medic on that team could do an appendectomy, and he could prescribe medicine, and he could do dentistry and veterinary medicine. Like, he was the best. And so nobody's coming that means, okay, we have to self-actualize. It's just us. We have to get it done. And that is the message in the book, although the title kind of grabs your attention because it sounds like, oh man, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
But the real message in the book is nobody's coming. Good. Let's get started.
Yep.
Because everything that you need to have, because the subtitle is A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Stuff Done. Everything you need to get big stuff done in your life is already in your human operating system. We've just buried it. So this book is about how to unbury it.
That's great. That's exactly what we need to do as human beings, big time in the world. We open up that what we've buried in there, because it'll change your life.
Yeah.
It'll change your life. So coming to the close here, what I like to do is I like closing out with what I call rapid fire. And it's just, I don't want much thought put to it. I'm going to ask you 10 questions, and from there, just give the first thing that comes to your mind. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. One move to connect with people fast. Go.
Ask them a question that starts with what and how about their day.
I like that. All right. Rooftop leadership in one sentence.
Connection.
All right. The word.
Connect like your life depends on it. How about that?
Say that again.
Connect like your life depends on it.
Well, I think you'd approach it a lot differently if that was the truth, right? If your life was dependent on it. The word you'd use the night Task Force Pineapple was running.
Promise.
I like that. That's well said. Name a scar you carry that you've made some kind of peace with.
Suicidal ideation.
I've been there myself. Nobody is coming to save you, or somebody is. Which one do you tell people?
Somebody is.
Always, right? There's someone out there. Name one thing you would tell yourself about your body during those 23 years that didn't hold up.
Say that part. Ask me that one more time.
Name one thing you would tell yourself about your body during those 23 years that it didn't hold up.
You did what you had to do.
Yeah. All right. All right. Writing last out versus living it. Harder which way?
Oh, writing it.
Yeah. Why?
Because these were things that I had buried and didn't want to come to face in a way that they were told from the stage. It's one thing to live them. It's another thing to tell the world about them.
No, it's, as someone who started doing that myself in the last couple of years, the one thing I'll say about it, why it's hard to do, what you get out of it is tremendous. For you, what do you think have you gotten out of that from being able to go out there and give these in talks and tell them what happened for yourself?
I'll give you this one. I was at a fundraiser a few months ago, and talking about the play, and a former Delta operator came up to me,
Mhm.
and he was in tears. And I'll leave his name out of it. And he said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Sure." He pulls me aside and he said, "I just want you to know your play saved my life." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I came to see your play in Tampa at the Straz Theater. I was ready to pull the trigger. I was done. I was checking out. I hit the go button, but I came to see your play on a whim. I was half liquored up. After I watched Last Out, I went out in the parking lot of the Straz and I sat on the suicide hotline for 3 hours. And that was 2 years ago. And now I lead a nonprofit that counters veteran suicide. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I've had that happen more than once."
That's damn, that's inspiring, man. um,
Oh,
yeah. Um, one thing you want the cadets at VMI to leave with?
oh, wow. What a great question. That that the things that we experienced in our life in the global war on terror, they don't have to re-experience. You
Right.
know, that the things that we went through with our bodies and our mental health, they don't have to go through that. Just because I'll refine it. Just because you serve with honor doesn't mean you're supposed to suffer
Mm,
following doing that.
yeah, that makes total sense. Because a lot of us do.
Yeah.
The night Task Force Pineapple was running. What's the one image that still sticks with you?
The way that the way that all those guys and girls that I knew and loved all those years came together, even though we many of us had not spoken in years, the way they came together without hesitation, with like smiles on their faces, like, "Hey, sir, looks like we're getting the band back together," and without an ounce of reservation, these men and women jumped into the fray to honor a promise and never once questioned the risk or anything about it. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. It was the most humbling, empowering thing I've ever seen in my life.
That's yeah. That's something you just can't. Yeah, that's almost a wordless for that because of the impact you had on so many individuals. Um, is
That's why I do
amazing.
the play. That's why I do the play, Zach, because I'm able to bring the emotional point of view of that. It's almost hard to put it into words, but in the play, I think civilians get the emotional point of view of why Afghanistan mattered so much and why veterans stepped up and did this and why our allies are so important. And that emotional point of view, you never forget that feeling. And so that's why I do the play because I don't even know how to put it into words.
Right. Sometimes it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Just like when we talk about the nonverbal communication, like sometimes like you can just read things and from our
Yeah.
human experience. Um, I'm going to ask you just a kind of different question and end on this. Um, there's so many people that probably are so thankful for all the stuff you've done and impacted on them. Um, when you look back, just like the guy you talked about from 2 years ago, what does it mean for you as a human being to know all of what you're doing for other people?
My wife Monty, who's just off camera here, she reminds me of those things all the time, and I have a tendency to not
I
even
kind of figured that. Put it,
think
not a big
about.
deal.
But the I appreciate you saying that. I mean, the thing that I just try to be every day is I just try to be Rex and Anita Mann's son. Like and I try to be Monty Mann's husband and dad to Cody Cooper and Braden. Like that's who I just try to show up as and just really not take myself seriously. Because if I start taking myself seriously or believe in my own press, then I do the cardinal sin that my dad always talked about, which was don't strut. And I just I'm a servant and I'm a vessel and a vehicle who's been gifted the opportunity to take good notes and tell stories about real heroes that I served alongside and men like you who gave so much. So like I don't know. I just it means the world to me when I meet them and when I hear from them. But what really means the world to me is when I see them telling their own story and I see them standing up there and making those connections and moving into a version of themselves that they didn't ever think they'd be able to do because of their pain and their darkness. That's what really lights me up is when I see them telling their own stories. At 57 years old, like that's all I want to do anymore is help people who are struggling find their own voice and tell their own story because frankly what the world needs. And if I can do that from the background, that makes me pretty happy.
Well, I would say you're doing a tremendous job at it, and the impact you're having on other people in this world. What I like talking about is what we don't often realize is when we do those things, we can see it in the moment, but we don't also realize the causation and the ripple effect we cause, because when you make a change in that person's life, the ripple effect is they go make other changes in other people's lives as well. So
Yeah,
a
it's like,
small act can carry generationally.
that's
And I
true.
think that's what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I
Well,
think
hey,
you are
again,
too. Platform is what you're doing. And, this is why I think it's so important for each of us to find the platforms where we can put our voice into the world unafraid and with all its scars and warts and because you never know, it's the person sitting in the back row, back corner that you never even meet whose life truly transformed. And I think that's what we're put here to do, particularly after coming out of service.
100%. And there's no way better to end than that. So really thankful for you coming on today, and look forward to hearing from you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me on, man.
Scott, thank you. That was a real thing, and I don't say that lightly. And here's what I want you to take from this. A man can spend 23 years being the strongest guy in the room and still be carrying a bill nobody's counting. The body keeps a receipt. It doesn't care how tough you were. And the standard checkup that tells you you aren't normal isn't measuring what you're actually carrying. But here's the other half, and Scott lived it. The scar isn't just damage. It's something you can use, something you can give, and nobody's coming to hand you your health back. That's not the bad news. That's the good news, because it means it's yours to take. If you're the guy who's been told you're fine and you know that you're not, this episode was for you. Stop waiting for someone to save you and go get the real numbers. Go check out Scott's work, Rooftop Leadership, and his books. And if you've got something out of this, do me a favor. Rate the show, leave a review, and hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It's how the right men find this. No hype, just standards.